Small talk has a bad reputation. We're kind of awkward about it, small is in the name, and YouTube is filled with videos about skipping the boring small talk. But at the same time, small talk is how we meet people, it's how we make friends, it's how we get to those deep conversations we love. And check this out. In a new study published right before Thanksgiving, researchers from Turkey, analyzed over 60,000 people, and they found that these small conversations like greeting and thanking predicted greater life satisfaction across the board. There's nothing small about that. I'm Sanjeev, I'm a cognitive scientist looking for interesting ways to connect deeper with the people in my life. Today we're gonna have a small talk about small talk. I had to make the joke, I'm sorry. The research in this field is fascinating and it points to 5 main strategies that can help us make small talk a great time. With strangers, on dates, even with our close friends. Let's jump in. Number 1, talk about yourself. So I thought I had this one down. I talk about myself all the time, but there's a specific way to do it that I did not realize. Communications coach Vinodh talks about conversational threading. It's a way to introduce topics, threads into a conversation that then the other person can grab onto to keep the conversation flowing. Let me give you an example. So if you asked me, hey, how was your day? And I said, good. How about you? Yeah, I've given you literally nothing to continue the conversation. Now compare that with this. If you ask me, hey, how was your day? And I say, it was great. I got to walk my dog. And there's something about being outside in the fresh air. It makes me feel creative. It helps me brainstorm ideas for my work. It was a great day. How about you? Now think about all the threads that's introduced to the conversation. 1, having a dog. 2, enjoying nature and fresh air. 3, having a job that requires some creativity. And the more the merrier, because any single one of those threads could take the conversation into a whole different direction. This is nuts. In one of the landmark studies in this space, Princeton researchers found that when we share stories with someone, the neural processes in both of our brains start to couple. They start to sync up, like you're literally on the same wavelength. And what's magical about it is that the story could be a life-changing moment from my childhood, or it could be of me walking the dog in the morning. Our brains will still sync up as long as the story is personal, as long as we're talking about ourselves. Up next is number 2, more questions and better questions. It is crazy to me how scientists studied this. Listen to this. In 2017, Harvard psychologists studied a speed dating scenario just to see the impact of asking follow-up questions in conversation. And what they found is that it dramatically increased liking and that the people who asked more follow-up questions got more second dates. I just love the idea of Harvard researchers walking up to people and being like, yo, what'd you think of that guy? You down? The speed dating study makes it clear that asking questions makes a big difference, right? It helps us learn about other people, shows them that we care, but what questions do we ask? How do we come up with them? Well, the sickest framework ever for this is from Stanford professor Matt Abrahams, and he calls it what, so what, now what? Here's how it works. When someone tells you a piece of information in conversation, you can generate a follow-up question in each of these 3 categories. So for example, in the what, a follow-up question would be like, oh, what is that? Tell me more about that. I don't know much about that field. The so what is more about the significance, the why. So it's questions like, oh, why do you like that? What do you find interesting about it? And finally, the now what is about the future. Questions like, oh, where do you want to go with that? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What are your next goals in this field? And this framework can basically generate infinite follow-up questions from any answer. But I keep reminding myself, this is not a strategy or a hack to trick someone into liking me. No, I'm already curious about you. I already care about you. These questions just help me communicate it. A new direction for number 3, physical presence. Okay, so when I'm listening to someone, they have my full attention, right? Or at least I think so. But when other people are gauging our attention levels, they can't read our mind. So they're going off of physical cues, off of our body language. I studied public speaking for around 6 years because I was competing around the country. And there were 3 main categories of body language that I had to learn how to be aware of. My eye contact, my body angle, and my hands. Let me tell you what I learned, because this stuff is so cool to see in myself and see in the people around me. First, for eye contact, what helped me a lot was looking at the other person for around 50% of the time when I'm talking, and around 70% of the time when I'm listening. I'm sorry, I have no academic sources for this one except this really cool YouTube short. Second, for body angle, studies from Australia show that men tend to be at like a 120-degree angle when talking, and women tend to be at a 180-degree angle, literally face to face. I kind of go somewhere in that range, probably more in the upper half between 150 and 180 degrees. Next time you go to a party, look around and just from the body angles, you can see who's into who. It is hilarious. And third, when it comes to hands, the research is painful, and it has to do with these bad boys. Researchers from Virginia Tech found that we feel less empathy from our friends if they're even holding a phone while talking to us. So why is that? Well, on a physical level, this is a very closed and constricted body position. It's also occupying my hands, reducing how expressive I can be. But on a literal level, it is signaling to the other person, hey, you are not my priority right now. So to recap, if we look at people, if we face their direction, and if we put our phones away, we should be good. The bar is literally in hell. Now for my personal favorite, number 4, joke around. There's a time when I'd assumed you don't want to be too funny in your first conversation with someone, right? Maybe they won't take you seriously. Maybe they'll think you're silly. And according to this study, I was completely wrong. This study is from the field of impression management. It's all about the impressions we leave on other people. And those impressions can be measured on 2 dimensions, warmth and competence. If I had to really simplify it, warmth is kind of how much affection, love we feel for another person, and competence is kind of how much we respect another person. And researchers have already studied this in an interview setting. So for example, when I answer a question about my strengths, my perception of warmth goes down, but my perception of competence goes up. And it's the exact opposite when I'm sharing my weaknesses. Obviously, the perception of my competence goes down, but the perception of my warmth goes up. And here's the crazy part. Researchers at the Academy of Management found that humor is one of the only tools that can increase perceptions of both warmth and competence. To simplify, humor is one of the only ways to talk about yourself that makes people want to love you and respect you. That is a crazy conclusion, but if you think about it, it's one of those studies that I look at and I'm like, yeah, that checks out. I moved around a ton growing up. I think it was like 12 times in 18 years, which means many places, many new friends, lots of small talk. And when I look back at the friendships that have stuck around through all those moves, at the memories that mean the most, it is always those dumb conversations where we're just messing around, laughing our butts off, being so dumb that we got kicked out of the room. So let's joke around. Let's tell people it's backed by research, and our small talk won't be boring anymore. And the one I need the most, number 5, exit gracefully. Let's be honest, we have all hit that. So, I got to, very awkward. Instead, here are the 2 smartest frameworks to exit a conversation gracefully. The first is from communications coach Charlie Houpert. 3 steps: interrupt, justify, reassure. Interrupt is for those moments where there's not really an opening in the conversation. So that's saying something like, hey, I hate to interrupt, but justify saying the actual reason. No, I gotta head to class, I'm late for a train, or something as simple as I gotta go. And finally, reassure is the nicest, honest thing that you can say to the other person. Something like, it was great talking to you. If we put it all together, it's something like, I hate to interrupt, I have to run to class, but this was a really interesting conversation. That's so good. The second framework is from Rachel Greenwald at Harvard Business School, and she calls it the white flag approach. Apparently, in NASCAR races, they wave a white flag to signal the final lap. So if a car sees a white flag, it knows to start preparing for what's to come. Rachel says we can do the exact same thing in a conversation to kind of ramp down to an exit instead of just kind of abruptly leaving. And that looks something like, okay, I gotta go in a minute, but before that, tell me more about that trip to Europe. This is also so good. We've given the other person a time limit so that they can kind of self-regulate the depth of that final answer. And we've reassured them that we're curious about what they have to say, that we actually care. If any of these small talk strategies sound cool to you, try them out. In cafes, in class, in line, literally anywhere. And if you're curious about small talk over text, check out this video for all the research about that. I'll see you in the next one.